Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take complex, fascinating research and analysis and really cut straight to the core of what you need to know to be truly well-informed. Today, we're diving into something I think a lot of us have wondered about. It's a critical and really detailed exploration of one of the most persistent phenomena in modern U.S. politics. I'm talking about the extreme, unwavering political loyalty shown to Donald Trump. It's a loyalty that has remained rock solid, not just through controversies, but, and this is the part that's so crucial, even after he was voted out of office.
It really is historically unusual. I mean, you look back, and arguably no other post-World War II U.S. politician has had that kind of consistent personal devotion, especially after leaving office.
And that core group of supporters, his base, they've really acted as this enabling force, right? It's allowed him to maintain an incredible grip on the Republican Party and just fundamentally reshape things.
That sustained, resilient devotion is precisely what makes this so compelling for researchers. The media, has often used this phrase, a cult of personality, and it's not just a throwaway line.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you look at the data, the use of that exact phrase in major news outlets, it just skyrockets. It starts climbing around 2015, and then it peaks dramatically in late 2020, early 2021. So this isn't just an insult. It's a descriptor for something real that warrants a serious psychological look.
Okay, so that sets up the big question for today's deep dive.
Exactly. The question isn't what these loyalists believe, but why they're so uniquely receptive to this kind of unwavering commitment. How do we understand this? Do these supporters share specific, measurable personality characteristics?
And that's where the Big Five comes in.
That's the framework. The study we're looking at applies the established Big Five personality dimensions: agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and openness, to see if there's a kind of psychological fingerprint here.
And let's just give you the core finding right away, because it's the hook for this whole conversation. It's really surprising.
It is. The research finds this robust, statistically unique discovery, high levels of conscientiousness, and even more specifically, the self-discipline facet of that trait.
And that's the key marker that distinguishes these most loyal followers.
Right. And this holds up even when you control for everything else you'd think would predict it. General conservatism, party ID, even attitudes like authoritarianism.
Okay, let's unpack that immediately, because on the surface, that sounds so counterintuitive. Conscientiousness, we usually think of that as a good thing. Being organized, reliable, having self-control.
Absolutely. Positive traits.
So why would that trait, this need for discipline and fidelity, translate into this resilient, sometimes dogmatic, and often unquestioning political devotion? We're going to spend the rest of our time really dissecting that mechanism and understanding the philosophical side of this unique connection.
To really get why this is such a new way of looking at things, we first have to understand the theoretical vacuum it's trying to fill. We have to go back to the historical context of cults in social science.
Right. This isn't a new term, but it's being applied in a new way.
Exactly. Most of the old literature on cult followership comes from, classical sociology. We're talking about small, maybe biased, qualitative studies of new religious movements, mostly from the 60s and 70s.
So not mass political movements in a modern democracy.
Not at all. And historically, there were two main ways of thinking about who joins these groups, and both focused on what the person is lacking.
Okay.
The first is the psychological argument. This suggests that people who join are vulnerable individuals. They're suffering from low self-esteem, isolation, maybe some disillusioning experiences. And they turn to the cult's belief system to kind of bolster their self-image.
So they're seeking affirmation, a sense of security because they feel vulnerable.
Exactly. They're looking to fill a personal void, a need for certainty that their life or, the wider world wasn't giving them. The movement provides the structure to rebuild a positive self-concept.
Okay, that's one model. What's the other?
The other stream is what you call the rationalist arguments. They focus more on the social context, especially this idea of relative deprivation.
So feeling like you've been left behind.
Precisely. In this view, members are trying to compensate for what they see as social inequities, a loss of status, maybe a lack of political power. The group, with its powerful belief structure, offers them a new, elevated status within the group.
So one is about an internal lack low self-esteem, and the other is about an external lack, like social or political status.
That's a great way to put it. But the key thing to take away from all this old literature, as the researchers here really stress, is that there's no real consensus. There's no single unified theory of what makes a cult follower.
And the big five personality traits weren't really part of that conversation back then.
Not at all. And that's the most important point for this study. Those early studies used concepts that were hard to measure or replicate. It created this huge gap when you try to analyze a mass political movement like the one we see today.
So this new research had to bridge that gap. It had to connect the general idea of a cult to this very specific phenomenon of extreme political followership.
And the common denominator they found, the thing that connects a small religious group to a huge political movement, is that unwavering, unquestioning loyalty. It's this persistent agreement with a leader, where the very act of displaying your loyalty becomes psychologically fulfilling.
It's not about the policy. It's about the loyalty itself.
It becomes an end in itself. And to create a modern framework for this, they leaned heavily on a 2023 theoretical discussion by Sundahl on political personality cults. And this framework gives us 3 key characteristics to look for.
Okay, what are they?
First, resilience of authority. This is critical. The leader status isn't contingent on political success or policy wins. Their authority endures. It doesn't matter if they win elections or pass laws. The loyalty is personal. It's not transactional.
That reminds me of that famous line, I could stand in the middle of 5th Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. That speaks directly to this, doesn't it? The loyalty is totally decoupled from normal performance.
It's a perfect example. Precisely. The second characteristic is symbolic elevation. The leader is placed above everyone else in society. Sometimes in these, almost messianic terms, they're not just an elected official, they're seen as a supreme, unique figure.
And the third?
The third is religious parallels. Representations of the leader, the practices around them, they start to take on these religious or spiritual undertones. The leader might be seen as a chosen one, a savior, and belief in them is maintained with a kind of dogmatic faith, even when there's tons of contradictory evidence.
So those 3 things, resilience, elevation, and religious parallels, those are the guideposts. They define the behavior that the researchers are trying to explain with personality traits.
Exactly. Now we can ask which personality traits would predict that kind of behavior.
Right. So the researchers went in with some clear expectations or conjectures based on decades of personality research, predicting how each of the big 5 might link up with this kind of loyalty.
Let's start with agreeableness. This trait is about being kind, cooperative, warm. The researchers expected loyalists to score low here.
That seems to make sense. Why, though?
Well, their reasoning is that high agreeableness is linked to being sensitive to other people's arguments, to being persuaded by strong points. And that just fundamentally clashes with the kind of dogmatic acceptance you need for total followership.
If you're highly agreeable, you want to avoid conflict.
Right, you want to maintain social harmony. But a loyalist has to be ready to dogmatically defend the leader against anyone. They have to be open to political conflict, to confrontation. And that readiness for a fight suggests a lower baseline for agreeableness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The public face of this kind of loyalty is often very confrontational. Okay, so now let's get to conscientiousness, which you said is the star of the show.
It is. So this trait is associated with being efficient, organized, reliable. And the researchers expected the most loyal supporters to get high scores.
And what was the thinking there before they even saw the results?
It was driven by 2 main ideas: obedience and an intolerance for uncertainty. Conscientiousness is really strongly linked to obedience, a desire for order, and this is important, an intolerance for complexity or ambiguity.
So they prefer a simple, clear structure.
Exactly. Extreme followership requires an appreciation for the self-discipline you need to maintain that unwavering loyalty in a chaotic world. The structure provided by one powerful leader is just psychologically preferable to a complex, messy reality.
And you mentioned a twist here.
Yes, and it's a fascinating one. This expectation for high conscientiousness was not based on the idea that followers see the leader as being like them. In fact, other studies found that people perceive Trump himself as scoring low in conscientiousness, disorganized, impulsive, not very thorough.
Whoa. So the theory wasn't, I see myself in him. It was something else entirely.
Right. It's not I am like the leader. It's more like the leader demands something of me. This total unwavering commitment that actually validates my own internal personality trait of disciplined adherence.
That's a really deep psychological contract.
Yeah.
It's not about similarity. It's about a need being met.
Precisely. Okay, so moving on. For neuroticism, which is about anxiety, worry, emotional instability, they expected high scores.
And that's based on the older cult research.
It is. It's rooted in that classic idea that emotional vulnerability is a key entry point. The thinking is that anxiety and worry could drive a desire for purpose and stability, and that's something a strong, singular leader promises to provide. They offer simple solutions to complex problems.
Makes sense. Okay, then there's openness. This is being curious, imaginative, intellectual. We know it correlates with political liberalism. What was the guess here?
The expectation was to find low scores. The reason is pretty straightforward. Extreme followership demands dogmatism.
You can't be too open to new ideas if your loyalty has to be absolute.
Exactly. If you're going to be highly loyal, you have to dismiss criticism, contradictory evidence, all the nuanced debates that might destabilize your belief in the leader's infallibility. Dogmatism and openness to ideas are basically opposites.
And finally, extroversion.
Here, they took a neutral position. They expected no clear association. The literature on obedience to authority is pretty mixed on whether it's linked to being outgoing or assertive.
Okay, before we jump to the results, we absolutely have to talk about the controls. Because this is where the study gets really rigorous, right? Making sure they're finding a personality trait and not just, an ideology.
This is absolutely critical. Political scientists have these standard measures for social attitudes, like right-wing authoritarianism, or RWA, and social dominance orientation, SDO. If you don't control for those, you might just be rediscovering a known ideological pattern.
Let's break those down because they can be confusing. What's the difference?
Okay, so RWA, right-wing authoritarianism, is an intergroup thing. It's about relationships within your own group. It has 3 parts: obedience to authority, moral conformity, and a desire for strict social control.
So an RWA-driven person is focused on making sure everyone in their group follows the rules and obeys the leaders.
Exactly. It's about internal order. Then you have SDO, social dominance orientation, which is an intergroup thing. It's about the relationship between your group and other groups.
Wanting your group to be on top.
That's it. It's a desire for hierarchical social systems where your in-group dominates out-groups. Politically, this shows up as support for policies that disadvantage other groups.
That distinction is so important because when you think about Trump's rhetoric, it really hits both of those notes. The demand for loyalty inside the GOP, that's RWA, and the constant creation of enemies or others, that's SDO.
And that's exactly why you have to control for both. They are social attitudes, not fundamental personality traits. But we know they correlate with the big 5. For instance, conscientiousness is positively linked to general conservatism.
So without the controls, you couldn't tell if you were just finding that conservatives are conscientious.
Precisely. The whole goal of the research was to isolate the variable, to show that a personality trait predicts this extreme loyalty, even after you've mathematically accounted for how conservative someone is, their party, their RWA, and their SDO. That rigor is what makes the final findings so powerful.
To get that kind of statistical isolation, you need a really robust methodology. And the researchers used 2 different studies 5 years apart, which I think is key. It shows this isn't just a flash in the pan.
Right, that cross-temporal validation is so important for the bigger implications. So study 1 was an online survey in April 2021. This is after the election loss, after the end of his presidency.
And that timing was on purpose.
It was. It was chosen to measure that resilience of authority we talked about, to assess support that sticks around even when the leader is, politically unsuccessful and out of office. And this study used the longer 44-item Big 5 inventory, the BFI.
Which is important
because it's the only one that lets you do the critical facet assessment. The ability to break down a trait like conscientiousness into its smaller parts, like self-discipline and order.
And Study 2.
Study 2 was a look back. It used the 2016 American National Election Study, the ANES. It provided that historical context from the first election, but it used a much shorter personality test, the TPI. So no facet analysis was possible there, but it gave them a benchmark.
And they were careful about the design, right?
Yeah.
I read that in Study 1, they asked the personality questions before the political ones.
Yes, and that's best practice in political psychology. It stops people's political mood from biasing how they answer questions about their own fundamental personality.
Okay, so let's get to the dependent variable. How did they define a Trump follower? They had to go way beyond just asking, do you approve of his job?
Way beyond. They had to capture that all-in, cult-like indicator. The goal was to find the people who exhibited those 3 characteristics: resilience, elevation, and the religious parallels.
So what did that look like in Study 1, the post-presidency one?
They used a really stringent index, combining 7 items that reflected the highest degree of loyalty. Let's walk through them, because you can see the theory in action.
Okay.
So first you have the basics. Voted for him in 2020. Strong approval of his performance and strong approval of his handling of coronavirus. just baseline stuff.
But then it gets more specific.
Right. The next items measure elevation and resilience. They asked if people believe he'd be an above average or outstanding president in history. That's symbolic elevation.
Placing him above his peers.
Then they asked if Republican leaders should follow his leadership even after he lost. That's a direct measure of resilience of authority. The loyalty is demanded and given no matter the political outcome.
And the last items get at that religious parallels idea.
Exactly. Belief that he acted responsibly after the election. That's the period of election denial on January 6th. And then strong agreement that the media treated him unfairly. This framing of unfair persecution is classic martyrdom stuff. It reinforces the idea of a chosen one fighting evil forces, which demands dogmatic faith from the follower.
That composite index is incredibly smart. It really separates the typical, I'm a Republican, so I'll vote for the Republican person from the, I believe in him as an infallible, elevated leader person.
It does. And the analysis really zeroed in on the people who scored above the mean on this index. We're talking about the top 10% of the sample in 2021. This ensures you're analyzing the psychology unique to that extreme commitment, not just the general GOP base.
And they did something similar for the 2016 study.
Yep. In 2016, the definition also focused on those all-in indicators. Did you vote for him? Did you have a strong emotional preference? Could you find nothing to dislike about him? Did you rate him 90 or above on a feeling thermometer? And did he make you feel hopeful most of the time or always? Again, it's about capturing that devotion that goes beyond just policy.
So we have a really solid definition of extreme loyalty, measured before and after his presidency, and we've isolated it from general ideology with all these controls. Now, let's get to the results.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, because all that hard work of controlling for ideology and party pays off. When they first ran the models without the controls, it looked like a standard conservative pattern, right?
Exactly. You saw conscientiousness being positive, openness being negative, pretty standard stuff. But then, when they introduced all the control variables, GOP ID, conservatism, RWA, SDO, the picture got much, much clearer.
And it proved this was about something other than just being conservative.
It did. The findings were refined dramatically. And two main results stayed statistically significant and robust across both the 2016 and 2021 studies.
What's the first one?
The first and the most important is that conscientiousness remained positively and significantly related to being a Trump follower in both contexts. This is the big, unique finding. The connection held up even when we accounted for whether someone was generally authoritarian or sought social hierarchy. So what does that actually mean? Let's break it down.
It means that, statistically speaking, you could take two people who are equally conservative and equally Republican, but the one who scores higher on conscientiousness is significantly more likely to show that highest degree of extreme cult-like loyalty to Trump personally.
That is the core breakthrough here. It's saying the psychological commitment is separate from the standard ideological one. But I have to ask, doesn't conscientiousness just correlate with being a reliable voter in general? How do we know this is about extreme loyalty?
That's a great question. And the answer is that it's about how strongly this trait predicts those 7 specific cult-like items we talked about. The demand for resilience, elevation, belief, and persecution. It goes far beyond just predicting someone will show up to vote. It predicts the dogmatic commitment required by this specific leader.
Okay, and what was the second critical result?
The second one really clarifies the role of ideology. That initial negative link between openness and being a follower, it disappeared. It became statistically insignificant once GOP identification and conservatism were controlled for.
Wait, so why did openness vanish when conscientiousness didn't?
Because being less open, less curious, less imaginative, that's a known hallmark of general political conservatism. So once the statistical model accounted for the fact that these followers are already conservative Republicans, openness stopped being a unique psychological feature of their extreme loyalty.
So being closed-minded is part of being a conservative in general, but it's not the special ingredient for this personality cult.
Exactly. The unique psychological fuel for the personality cult is elsewhere. It's conscientiousness.
And it looks like the initial guesses about agreeableness being low and neuroticism being high just didn't hold up in the final models.
That's right. When you account for all the other factors, those traits didn't reliably distinguish the most loyal followers. The focus narrows really robustly right down to conscientiousness.
And this wasn't just a small effect, was it?
No, not at all. It was substantial. The study quantified it. moving from the very low end of the conscientiousness scale, the 5th percentile, to the very high end, the 95th, increased the likelihood of being a strong follower by about 10 to 29% across the different studies. This isn't just a statistical blip, it's a substantively important psychological fact.
Okay, so now we move from that big finding to the absolute core mechanism.
Yeah.
Because conscientiousness isn't just one thing. It's made up of different facets, and the distinction here explains why this trait translates into this behavior. This is why study 1 was so important.
Yes, this is the facet analysis. It provides the philosophical leverage we need to really get this. So the order facet is what you typically think of. Being organized, meticulous, thorough. It's about neatness and structure.
Okay.
But the self-discipline facet is different. It's about being reliable, responsible, persistent. It's about having high internal self-control and, crucially, fidelity to your commitments.
And the 2021 data found a profound difference between these two.
A critical distinction. They found that the facet of order was significantly related to general conservatism. And this makes perfect sense. It lines up with tons of prior research suggesting that a desire for structured living, tradition, and organization is a core part of traditional conservative ideology.
But that wasn't the driver of the extreme loyalty.
No. Here's the mechanism. The facet of self-discipline was significantly related to being a Trump follower. When you control for everything else, self-discipline remained the only Big Five facet that was statistically significant in predicting this extreme loyalty.
Wow. So if you're someone just seeking structure and tradition, you find that in general conservatism. But if you have this deep internal need for disciplined adherence, for reliability and persistence in your commitments, you're uniquely drawn to this specific leader's demands for total loyalty.
That's the psychological pathway. It's the capacity for committed obedience and internal fidelity that separates them.
Why, though? Why does high internal self-discipline lead to this kind of external, unquestioning loyalty?
Well, think about it. The highly disciplined person seeks environments where that internal trait, their commitment and reliability, is valued and, importantly, tested. They don't like half measures.
Do you want to go all in?
Right. So when a leader like Trump demands total, non-negotiable loyalty and frames the world in these stark terms of good and evil, with no room for ambiguity, it validates their internal need for discipline.
So they find the psychological reward not of the policy outcome, but in the fidelity of their commitment itself. The disciplined person finds satisfaction in just sticking with it no matter what.
Exactly. The leader's rhetoric, "I alone can fix it. I am your warrior." It's a call to service that is deeply satisfying to someone who is wired for self-discipline. The leader demands external fidelity, and the highly disciplined follower translates their internal self-control into an external political commitment. It transforms politics into a moral quest where loyalty is the highest virtue.
And the data backs this up, right? It connects self-discipline specifically to those non-policy cult-like parameters.
It does. This is where the study definitively links the personality trait to the cult framework. The analysis confirmed that self-discipline was significantly associated with the strongest belief in Trump's leadership and, crucially, his status as an elevated figure. They're not just following a platform, they're adhering to an exalted person.
And what about the religious parallels?
This is fascinating. Self-discipline strongly correlated with the highest degree of belief that Trump actually won the 2020 election.
Wow.
The study interprets that specific belief as a reflection of faith in Trump as truthful and infallible. Maintaining that belief, despite all the external evidence, requires intense cognitive effort and a disciplined adherence to the leader's claim. It aligns perfectly with the self-discipline trait.
So the capacity for something like the big lie to stick around isn't just an ideological thing. It's psychologically sustained by the follower's own internal need for disciplined belief.
And here's the kicker, the final finding that proves the resilience component. We said resilience means the leader's authority isn't based on success. Crucially, the study found that self-discipline was not associated with strong job approval for Trump as president.
Wait, run that by me again. High self-discipline predicts belief in his status and leadership, but not necessarily his job performance.
Precisely. If loyalty was based on, transactional things like, did you do a good job on the economy, then you'd expect high conscientiousness, probably the order facet, to predict high job approval. But it doesn't.
So what does that mean?
It means their loyalty is truly resilient. It doesn't depend on specific accomplishments or objective policy success. They are committed to the person and to the discipline of adherence itself. It confirms that the leader's status isn't contingent on success, which is the foundational characteristic of a personality cult. The loyalty is fundamentally decoupled from his resume.
This just changes the whole frame of analysis.
Right.
We're not really talking about politics in the traditional sense of policy debates anymore. We're talking about a leader who has found a specific psychological profile, the highly self-disciplined person, and has leveraged their need for persistent commitment into a political tool.
And that in itself is unique in modern democracies. I mean, historically, personality cults needed total state control of the media to work. To see this dynamic flourish in a complex, diverse information landscape like the U.S. suggests there's a really powerful psychological driver at play here, one that transcends political structures.
So let's bring this all together. What's the core summary of this research?
The core finding is that Trump's appeal for his most committed followers goes way beyond policy or ideology or even general conservatism. The attraction is fundamentally personality-based. It's rooted in high levels of self-discipline. These are citizens who are inclined toward reliability, responsibility, and high self-control, and they're looking for an opportunity to commit that internal discipline to an external, simplified, loyalty-demanding cause.
When you put it like that, you can see how his rhetoric systematically appeals to that desire. All those phrases, I am your voice, I alone can fix it, and then the later, more militant stuff, I am your warrior, I am your retribution.
They're not just political slogans.
No, they're calls to join a moral mission that requires total, unwavering fealty.
And his leadership style, which constantly demands and tests that loyalty while attacking anyone with divided authority. It serves as this perfect psychological meeting point for that highly self-disciplined citizen. They find the adherence appealing because it provides a clear sense of moral purpose. It makes them uniquely susceptible to these personalistic, loyalty-demanding leaders.
This also touches directly on those religious parallels we talked about earlier. We see real-world examples of this all the time, people referring to them as a divinely ordained savior or a chosen one. That imagery reinforces the idea of infallibility. It allows the follower to frame any loss or failure as persecution by evil forces, rather than an arrow on his part.
And that, in turn, allows the self-discipline required to maintain that loyalty to continue, unchecked. It satisfies the resilience element of the cult framework perfectly.
It's just so deeply counterintuitive that a trait we generally associate with positive personal outcomes, reliability, success, self-control, could be the very psychological vulnerability that's leveraged to demand this uncritical personal devotion.
It is. And it forces us to ask some really tough questions about the nature of democratic resilience. When the allegiance of a significant, identifiable segment of the electorate is rooted in the psychological need for disciplined adherence to an individual, rather than to democratic institutions or critical policy scrutiny.
It becomes a structural challenge to the system itself.
It does. But what this study provides is a solid, methodologically rigorous foundation for starting to understand these political personality cults in modern democracies. It shows that political psychology can successfully isolate these phenomena from general ideology, giving us a much clearer view of what's driving things beneath the surface.
Absolutely. The reader of Separating Self-Discipline from General Conservatism gives us this profound, actionable insight. It moves the whole conversation past simple labels and into measurable psychological traits.
And to conclude, we often celebrate traits like high conscientiousness and self-discipline in our culture. We see them as virtues. Yet here, we see that same internal drive being leveraged by a leader to demand uncritical personal loyalty.
That leaves us with a really challenging final thought for you, the listener, to consider. How does the presence of citizens who are actively seeking a disciplined, total commitment from their political leaders, a psychological contract we usually associate with personal success, how does that fundamentally alter the foundations of a democratic system that's built on diverse opinions and critical scrutiny?
Right. If a significant portion of the electorate values the discipline of adherence more than the labor of critical assessment, what happens to democratic debate?
And we should remember, this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. The source material notes that other democratic leaders around the world, like India's Narendra Modi, have also been described as leading these kinds of political personality cults. Understanding the psychological profile of the loyal follower is becoming crucial for global political comprehension.
It really is.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the personality of unwavering political loyalty. We hope this analysis helps you approach political coverage with a fresh, psychological perspective on the powerful drivers beneath the surface. Until next time.